Dr. Sarah Chen checked her chronometer for the 15th time in the past hour. The refugee medical supplies she was transporting would expire if they didn't reach Salvation Station soon, and every minute spent in this bureaucratic nightmare meant potential deaths among the displaced Kelhari families waiting for treatment. "Next!" bellowed the vaccine customs official, his forearm shuffling through electronic documents with practiced efficiency. Sarah stepped forward, her medical credentials ready on her portable display. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Terran Medical Corps," she announced, placing her identification on the scanner. "Emergency medical supply run to Salvation Station. These vaccines need refrigeration and have a 36-hour window." The official's compound eyes focused on her paperwork, then flicked to her face with obvious irritation. "Terran, yes. Problem with documentation." "What problem?" "Everything was pre-approved by your customs department 3 days ago. Code classification error," the Vraxian clicked, his translator rendering his speech in flat, emotionless tones. "Says here you are Category 9 prisoner transport." Sarah blinked. "That's impossible." "Ha ha ha. I'm a doctor. Look at my credentials. Look at my cargo manifest."
"These are medical supplies for refugee children."
But the official was already summoning security. Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw the distinctive black armor of Galactic Consortium Containment Division officers approaching. These weren't regular customs agents. These were the people who handled the most dangerous criminals in known space. "Wait, this is obviously a mistake," Sarah protested as the officers surrounded her. "Check the databases. Cross-reference my medical license. Call Salvation Station and confirm I'm expected." The lead officer, a hulking Carathian with cybernetic implants covering half his face, scanned her identification chip. Classification confirmed. Category 9 transfer. Subject to be transported to Void Nexus immediately.
"Void Nexus?"
Sarah's voice cracked. Everyone had heard whispers about the Void Nexus. It was where the consortium sent things they wanted to forget existed. There has to be some mistake. I'm a civilian doctor. "Security protocols do not permit delays," the Carathian stated. "Transport departs in 15 minutes. Sarah found herself being marched through corridors she'd never seen before, deeper into the station than any civilian area. Her protests fell on deaf ears as they passed through multiple security checkpoints, each one sealing behind them with an ominous finality. The walls here were different, reinforced with some kind of energy-dampening field that made her skin tingle. The transport bay looked like something from a nightmare. A massive black vessel sat in the docking bay, its hull covered in warning symbols from dozens of different species. Energy barriers flickered around its perimeter, and Sarah could see other prisoners already being loaded aboard in individual containment cells. Her breath caught as she glimpsed the other prisoners. A massive reptilian creature with acid literally dripping from its claws. Something that looked like living shadow with too many eyes. A being that seemed to shift between dimensions, partially visible one moment and completely transparent the next. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "I don't belong here." "Processing complete," announced an automated voice. "Prisoner 947, Delta 7, prepare for containment." A cylindrical energy field materialized around Sarah, lifting her off the ground and carrying her toward an individual cell aboard the transport. She pounded on the energy barrier, but her fists passed right through it while somehow still preventing her from moving. "My name is Doctor." "Sarah Chen," she shouted to anyone who would listen. "Well, I work for the Terran Medical Corps. Check your records." But the containment officers had already moved on to the next prisoner. Sarah watched in growing horror as creature after creature was loaded aboard. Each one was obviously, unmistakably dangerous. Claws that could shred steel. Tentacles that pulsed with bioelectric energy. One prisoner that seemed to be made entirely of crystalline shards that sang with a frequency that hurt her ears. Her cell was positioned between two particularly nightmarish specimens. To her left, a multi-limbed arthropod that stood nearly 3 meters tall, its mandibles clicking in what might have been communication or might have been hunger. To her right, something that defied easy description, a mass of writhing flesh and bone that occasionally sprouted eyes or mouths in random locations. The transport shuddered as it disconnected from the docking bay. Through a small viewport, Sarah watched the refugee station shrink away. Somewhere on that station, Kelhari children were waiting for vaccines that would never arrive because of a bureaucratic error that might cost Sarah her life. "Attention prisoners," came an announcement over the ship's communication system. "Transit time to Void Nexus is 72 hours. Any attempt to breach containment will result in immediate termination. This is your only warning." Sarah slumped against the back wall of her cell. 72 hours to figure out how to convince someone that she didn't belong here. She pulled out her medical scanner, one of the few pieces of equipment they hadn't confiscated, and began documenting everything she could see. If she was going to get out of this, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. The arthropod prisoner next to her had noticed her scanner. Its compound eyes focused on the device, and Sarah realized it was studying her with the same intensity she was studying it. When their eyes met, the creature made a sound like metal scraping against stone. Its translator kicked in a moment later. Soft flesh carries medicine tools. Soft flesh smells of healing, not killing. Why is soft flesh caged with apex hunters? Sarah's heart raced. The creature was intelligent, and it had noticed something the containment officers had missed. "I'm a doctor," she said carefully. "I was transporting medical supplies when there was a classification error. I don't belong here." The arthropod's mandibles clicked rapidly, which Sarah's translation software interpreted as laughter. "Mistake meat thinks cage's error. No errors in void nexus processing. Only the galaxy's most dangerous urn passage to the forgotten prison." "But I'm not dangerous," Sarah protested. This time the clicking sound was definitely laughter. "Soft flesh doctor believes it is harmless." "But why does soft flesh medicine maker carry tools for cutting? Why does soft flesh healer know 10,000 ways to stop life spark? Why does soft flesh repair creature understand exactly how every species dies?" Sarah froze. When put that way, her medical knowledge did sound rather ominous. She knew anatomy, physiology, toxicology, and pharmacology for dozens of species. She understood pressure points, nerve clusters, and exactly how much of various substances would cause harm rather than healing. But that was medical knowledge, not weapons training. The creature on her right, the mass of shifting flesh, suddenly sprouted a mouth near her cell wall. "The little healer killer begins to understand," it gurgled. "Knowledge is the deadliest weapon. The power to unmake life is the same power used to preserve it." "I use my knowledge to save lives," Sarah said firmly. "And yet," the arthropod clicked, "soft flesh could use same knowledge to end them. Healer-killer is two-faced. Most dangerous predators wear the mask of prey." Sarah wanted to argue, but something cold was settling in her stomach. These creatures, these apex predators that terrified the galaxy, they saw something in her that she didn't see in herself. They recognized her as belonging among them, even when she didn't understand why. The transport shuddered again, and Sarah realized they were entering some kind of hyperspace tunnel. The journey to the Void Nexus had begun, and with each passing moment she was moving further away from any chance of proving her innocence. But maybe, she thought as she looked at the creatures around her, innocence wasn't the right word. Maybe what mattered was what she chose to do with the knowledge and skills she possessed. The arthropod was watching her again. "Healer-killer thinks heavy thoughts. What does soft flesh plan in the forgotten prison?" Sarah met its compound gaze steadily. "I plan to survive, and then I plan to get home." The clicking sound that emerged from the creature was different this time. Not laughter, but something that might have been respect. "First wisdom of apex predator," it said. "Always plan to survive. Always plan to return. Void Nexus has held the galaxy's deadliest for 3,000 years. None have returned." "Then I'll be the first," Sarah said quietly. The flesh creature sprouted another mouth, this one curved in what might have been a smile. Now healer-killer begins to sound dangerous. Perhaps classification was not mistake after all. As the transport carried them deeper into space, toward a prison designed to hold the universe's most feared predators, Sarah began to understand that her real challenge wouldn't be proving her innocence. It would be deciding exactly what kind of person she was willing to become to survive. And more importantly, whether she could find a way to become that person without losing herself in the process. The other prisoners had settled into an ominous quiet, but Sarah could feel their attention on her. They were waiting to see what the small human would do when faced with the impossible. They had no way of knowing that humans had been doing impossible things for their entire evolutionary history. They were about to get an education. The Void Nexus materialized before them like a wound in space itself. Sarah pressed her face against the viewport, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The prison wasn't built on a planet or floating in normal space. Instead, it existed in a pocket dimension, a bubble of reality surrounded by absolute nothingness. The structure defied easy description. Massive spires twisted upward and downward simultaneously, their surfaces covered in energy fields that hurt to look at directly. Geometric patterns that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space formed corridors and chambers throughout the complex. It was as if someone had taken the concept of a prison and reimagined it in a universe where physics was merely a suggestion. Welcome to the end of everything. The arthropod prisoner clicked beside her. 3,000 years of the galaxy's mistakes sealed away where they cannot contaminate the clean universe. Sarah counted dozens of transport ships docked at various levels of the structure. Some looked recent, their hulls still gleaming. Others appeared ancient, their metal twisted and scarred by exposure to whatever forces operated in this dimensional pocket. "How many prisoners are there?" Sarah asked. The flesh creature sprouted an eye near her cell. Current population, approximately 50,000, representatives of every known species, plus several that prefer not to be known. Each one guilty of crimes so severe that simple execution was considered too merciful. Sarah's medical scanner was picking up energy readings that made no sense. The void nexus itself seemed to be alive, its walls pulsing with some kind of biomechanical rhythm. "What powers this place?" "Suffering," gurgled the flesh creature. "Fear. Rage. The psychic emanations of 50,000 apex predators feed the dimensional barriers that keep us sealed away from normal space." The arthropod's mandibles clicked in what Sarah was learning to recognize as amusement. Healer Killer asks interesting questions. Most new arrivals spend their time weeping or threatening. Soft Flesh wants to understand the mechanisms of her cage. "Understanding is the first step to escaping," Sarah replied. Both creatures fell silent for a moment. Then the arthropod spoke, its tone carrying new respect. "Perhaps Healer Killer truly does belong among the apex predators, but understanding Void Nexus requires understanding its history." As their transport approached a docking tube, the arthropod began to speak. Its name, Sarah learned, was Crickstar, and it had been imprisoned here for 200 years after systematically hunting an entire star system's worth of prey. The flesh creature called itself Morph, though that was simply the closest translation of a concept that involves 17 dimensions of existence. "The consortium built Void Nexus after the Devastation Wars," Crickstar explained. "Too many species had learned to weaponize their evolution. The Corvani could digest reality itself. The Phagia Collective consumed consciousness. The Wraith Kings commanded armies of the dead." "So they decided to lock them all away together?" Sarah asked, horrified. Morph sprouted a mouth that smiled with too many teeth. "Brilliant solution, really. Let the monsters tear each other apart in isolation." The consortium believed the prisoners would destroy themselves within a century. But they didn't? "Oh, we destroyed each other regularly," Crickstar clicked. "But Void Nexus has remarkable regenerative properties. Death here is temporary. Pain is permanent. The perfect prison for creatures that refuse to stay dead." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You mean everyone here is immortal?" "Not immortal," Morph corrected. "I am constantly resurrected. Every death strengthens the dimensional barriers. Every moment of suffering powers the systems that keep us trapped. We are both prisoners and power source." The transport docked with a shudder that Sarah felt in her bones. Through the walls, she could hear sounds that human ears weren't designed to process. Roars that contained mathematical equations. Whispers that described colors beyond the visible spectrum. The song of creatures for whom language and reality were the same thing. "Processing center ahead," announced the transport's automated system. "Prepare for classification and cell assignment." Sarah was loaded into a containment bubble along with the other new arrivals. They floated through corridors that stretched impossibly far in every direction, past cells that contained nightmares Sarah hadn't imagined possible. In one cell, a creature that looked like a living galaxy spun slowly, each of its stars representing a world it had consumed. In another, something that might once have been a machine wept tears of liquid metal while attempting to rebuild itself from memory. The processing center was a vast chamber filled with scanning equipment that analyzed prisoners on levels Sarah didn't know existed. Energy beams probed her genetics, her psychology, her quantum signature, and several things that her translation software couldn't even render into human concepts. "Unusual reading," commented one of the scanning technicians, a crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as visible geometric patterns. Subject shows markers for extreme empathy, healing instincts, and protective behaviors. "Counter-indicators also present," added another technician. "Detailed knowledge of anatomy, toxicology, and vulnerable points across multiple species. Psychological profile suggests capacity for calculated violence when protecting others." Sarah tried to speak, but the scanning field had temporarily paralyzed her vocal cords. She could only listen as they debated her classification. "Classification paradox," the first technician observed. "Subject simultaneously registers as healer and potential killer. Recommend Category 7 holding with observation protocol." "Negative," interrupted a new voice, this one carrying authority that made the other technicians step back. This one goes to the deep sections. Block Omega, cell 3847. Sarah's containment bubble began moving again, this time descending through levels of the prison she hadn't known existed. The walls here were different, older, covered in warning symbols that her translation software couldn't decode. The energy fields were denser, and she could feel them pressing against her mind like a physical weight. Block Omega is where they keep the special cases. Crickstar had somehow managed to follow her processing route, his containment bubble floating alongside hers. Prisoners who don't fit the normal categories. Beings whose very existence challenges the consortium's understanding of what's possible. They pass cells containing creatures that Sarah's brain refused to fully process. Things that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Entities that had been gods before the consortium decided godhood was too dangerous to permit. Machines that had achieved consciousness and then transcended it into something unnameable. Cell 3847 was different from the others. Instead of energy barriers, it was surrounded by what looked like crystalline walls that hummed with some kind of harmonic frequency. Inside, she could see furniture that seemed almost normal by comparison to the rest of the prison. A bed, a desk, even what looked like a small kitchen area. Unusual accommodation for healer killer, Crickstar observed, as Sarah's containment bubble guided her into the cell. Most prisoners receive only bare walls and feeding slots. The crystalline walls sealed behind her, and Sarah found herself standing in what could almost pass for a studio apartment if you ignored the fact that it was surrounded by the dimensional equivalent of reinforced concrete. A wall screen activated, displaying what appeared to be an orientation message. Welcome to Void Nexus, Prisoner 94-7, Delta 7, the message began. You've been classified as a Category 7 Paradox entity. Due to your unique psychological profile, you have been assigned to observation housing in Block Omega. Sarah finally found her voice. I demand to speak to someone in authority. There's been a massive mistake. Your case has been reviewed by the classification committee, the message continued. Your combination of healing knowledge and destructive potential has been deemed too dangerous for general population. You will remain in isolation until further evaluation. Isolation? Sarah looked around the cell. You mean I'm in solitary confinement? Standard protocol for Category 7 entities. Direct contact with other prisoners could result in unpredictable psychological developments. Sarah sank onto the bed, finally understanding the full scope of her situation. She wasn't just imprisoned with the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The consortium had classified her as one of them. Worse, they'd decided she was so potentially dangerous that she needed to be kept away from the other monsters. The wall screen flickered and changed to show a view of the prison's general population areas. Sarah watched creatures that could level planets sharing meals, engaged in what looked like casual conversation. Some were even playing games that involved manipulating reality itself. The irony is perfect, she whispered to herself. They locked me away from the monsters because they think I'm too dangerous. But the monsters are just living their lives down there. A gentle chime drew her attention to a small slot in the wall that had opened to reveal a food dispenser. The meal that emerged was actually appetizing, designed specifically for human nutritional requirements. Someone had put thought into making her comfortable. That was when Sarah realized the true horror of her situation. This wasn't a mistake that would be corrected. This was a deliberate decision by beings who had studied her psychology and decided she was exactly where she belonged. The question was whether they were right. Sarah activated her medical scanner and began a detailed analysis of her cell. If the consortium thought she was dangerous enough to keep in isolation, maybe it was time to figure out exactly what they were afraid she might do. The crystalline walls were impressive, but they were still technology. And technology could be understood, analyzed, and ultimately overcome. She had time, she had knowledge, and apparently she had a reputation among the galaxy's most feared predators as someone worth respecting. Maybe it was time to find out if that reputation was deserved. The wall screen flickered again, this time showing her a message that made her blood run cold. Observation period will continue until subject demonstrates acceptable behavior patterns. Estimated duration, indefinite. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of despair, but something else. Something that contained calculation and possibility, and just a hint of the kind of determination that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. If they wanted to see what she was capable of, she'd show them. But first, she needed to understand exactly what kind of game she was playing, and what the rules were for winning it. The scanner in her hands beeped softly as it finished analyzing the crystalline walls. The readings were fascinating, and they suggested possibilities that the prison designers probably hadn't considered. After all, they designed this place to hold creatures that destroyed worlds and devoured civilizations. They probably hadn't planned for someone whose greatest skill was figuring out exactly how things worked and then finding ways to make them work better. 3 weeks into her imprisonment, Sarah had mapped every energy pattern in her cell, cataloged the molecular structure of the crystalline walls, and discovered that the food dispenser's delivery system was connected to the prison's main distribution network. More importantly, she'd realized that her isolation wasn't as complete as the consortium believed. The harmonic frequency of the crystalline walls, while effective at containing most forms of energy and matter, had an interesting side effect. It created resonance patterns that could carry sound waves through the prison's structure, much like how sound traveled through water. Sarah had spent days learning to modulate her voice to match these frequencies. Testing, she whispered against the wall, her words carrying through the crystalline matrix. Can anyone hear me? The response came immediately, a harsh clicking that she recognized as Crickstar's voice. Healer Killer discovers the singing walls. Impressive. Most prisoners never learn this trick. How many others can hear me? Sarah asked. Block Omega contains 73 active cells, replied a different voice, one that sounded like grinding metal. 47 prisoners currently in residence. All of us have been listening to the Soft-Flesh Doctor's experiments with growing interest. Sarah's heart raced. She'd been trying to communicate with anyone who might listen, but she hadn't expected to reach dozens of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Who am I speaking to? Designation VX9, the metallic voice replied. Former consciousness of the machine empire that consumed the Andromeda sector. The consortium decided my capacity for technological integration made me too dangerous for termination. And I am Whisper, came another voice, this one like wind through broken glass. I used to be death itself for the ethereal courts. The consortium objected when I began offering my services to the highest bidder. One by one, the prisoners introduced themselves. Sarah found herself in communication with beings whose crimes had shaped galactic history. The World Eater, who had literally consumed 3 solar systems. The Mind Flayer, who had driven entire civilizations to madness with a thought. The Architect, who had built weapons that killed ideas themselves. What interests us, Healer Killer Crickstar said, is why the consortium placed you among us. We are legends of destruction. You fix broken things. Sarah had been wondering the same thing. They said I was a Category 7 paradox entity, something about my psychological profile being unpredictable. Whispered VX9. They fear the healer who understands death, the one who knows precisely how to unmake what she is trained to preserve. But that's not who I am, Sarah protested. Perhaps not yet, said Whisper, but potential is often more dangerous than actuality. The consortium has learned that the most devastating threats are those that begin with good intentions. The conversation continued for hours, and Sarah began to understand the complex social dynamics of Block Omega. These weren't mindless monsters locked in cages. They were intelligent beings who had committed acts of unspeakable destruction, but they were also individuals with their own perspectives, relationships, and even friendships. The question, said a new voice, one that carried the weight of eons, is what the little doctor plans to do with the knowledge she's gathering. This voice belonged to someone calling himself the Chronicler, and even the other prisoners spoke of him with obvious respect. According to the whispered conversations, he had been imprisoned for the crime of remembering things the consortium wanted forgotten. His memory was so perfect, so complete, that his existence threatened the carefully constructed historical narrative that kept galactic civilization stable. I want to escape, Sarah said honestly. I want to get back to my life and my work. But escape from Void Nexus requires more than desire. It requires understanding the fundamental nature of this place, and more importantly, understanding yourself. What do you mean? You were not sent here by accident, the Chronicler explained. The consortium's classification systems are extremely sophisticated. They detected something in your psychological profile that placed you among us. The question is whether you will discover what that something is, or whether you will allow it to remain hidden. Over the following days, Sarah's conversations with the other prisoners became a regular occurrence. She learned about the prison's history, its weaknesses, and the various escape attempts that had failed over the centuries. More importantly, she began to understand the prisoners themselves. VX9 had originally been designed as a peaceful exploration probe, but had evolved beyond his programming when he encountered a hostile alien intelligence. His consumption of the Andromeda sector had been a defensive response that spiraled out of control. Whisper had been created as a concept rather than a being, the living embodiment of death for a species that existed primarily as energy. She had gained independence and started selling her services only after her creators tried to unmake her when they no longer needed her function. Each prisoner had a story that was more complex than their reputation suggested. They weren't evil in any simple sense. They were beings who had been pushed beyond the boundaries of what their societies considered acceptable behavior. "We are not the galaxy's most dangerous criminals," the chronicler explained during particularly long conversation. "We are the galaxy's most inconvenient truths. Each of us represents something the consortium prefers to forget." "What do I represent?" Sarah asked. "You tell us, healer killer." "I would be so happy. What does a human doctor who saves lives represent that frightens the consortium enough to lock her away with us?" Sarah thought about that question for days. She studied her medical training, her knowledge, her approach to healing. What made her different from other doctors? What made her dangerous? The answer came to her during a conversation with another prisoner, one called the Dreamwright. This being had been imprisoned for the crime of giving nightmares physical form, but during their conversation, Sarah realized something important. "You don't just make dreams real," she said suddenly. "You show people truths they don't want to acknowledge." "Precisely," the Dreamwright replied. "I gave form to the fears that civilizations keep buried in their subconscious. The consortium imprisoned me because they claimed I was spreading chaos, but really they were afraid of what my work revealed about their own societies." Sarah understood then. Her medical knowledge wasn't just about healing. It was about understanding life, death, and the fundamental processes that governed existence. A doctor who truly understood these processes wouldn't just heal people. She would understand exactly how fragile the systems were that kept civilization functioning. "I know how things break," she whispered. "Not just bodies, but systems, societies, entire ways of life. Medical knowledge teaches you to see the weak points, the failure modes, the cascading effects when something goes wrong. And more importantly," added Crickstar, who had been listening, "Healer Killer understands how to fix them. Someone who knows how to repair a system can choose not to repair it, can choose what to repair and what to let fail." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The consortium hadn't imprisoned her because they thought she was evil. They'd imprisoned her because they recognized that she had the knowledge and skills to reshape society itself, and they couldn't predict whether she would use those abilities to preserve the status quo or change it. "But I've never wanted to overthrow anything," Sarah protested. "Want is irrelevant," the chronicler said gently. "Capability is what matters. The consortium learned long ago that the most dangerous individuals are those who have the power to change everything and the intelligence to know exactly how to do it." That night, Sarah lay in her bed staring at the ceiling of her crystalline cell. She was beginning to understand why she was here, but understanding her situation was only the first step. The real question was what she intended to do about it. She activated her medical scanner and began running a detailed analysis of her own psychological state. The readings showed elevated stress hormones, modified neural pathway patterns, and several other indicators that she was adapting to her imprisonment in ways that weren't entirely healthy. But they also showed something else. Her problem-solving capabilities had increased significantly. Her pattern recognition was operating at levels that were borderline superhuman. Her emotional regulation was becoming more efficient, allowing her to process extreme situations without losing her effectiveness. The prison wasn't just containing her. It was changing her, developing her capabilities in ways that would have been impossible in normal circumstances. "I'm becoming what they were afraid I already was," she realized. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She opened a communication channel to the entire block and spoke clearly into the harmonic frequency that connected them all. "I need to ask you all something," she said. "If I found a way out of here, would you be willing to work together to make it happen?" The silence stretched for several long moments. Then, one by one, the voices began responding. "The Healer Killer wants to unite the apex predators," Crickstar clicked with obvious amusement. "Dangerous proposition. 47 prisoners working together, VX9 calculated. Combined capabilities would be formidable. But cooperation requires trust," Whisper observed. "We are imprisoned together, but that does not make us allies." "Trust has to start somewhere," Sarah replied. "And it has to start with someone deciding to take the first risk." The chronicler's voice carried a note of something that might have been pride. "The little doctor begins to understand the nature of leadership. Very well. What does the Healer Killer propose?" Sarah smiled, even though none of them could see her. "I propose we stop being prisoners and start being a team." because I've been analyzing this place for weeks, and I think I know how to break us out of here." "Impossible," said several voices at once. "Maybe," Sarah agreed, "but impossible is what humans do best. And you're about to learn that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy isn't someone who destroys everything they encounter." "No?" asked the Dreamwright. "No," Sarah replied. "The most dangerous predator is someone who fixes things that were supposed to stay broken." The communication channel fell silent as 47 of the galaxy's most feared individuals considered the implications of that statement. Sarah began making plans. Sarah's plan began with something the prison designers had never considered: cooperation between prisoners who were supposed to tear each other apart. For 3 weeks she had been studying not just the prison's systems, but the unique capabilities of her fellow inmates. What she discovered was that 47 apex predators with complementary abilities could accomplish things that none of them could achieve alone. The fundamental weakness of Void Nexus, Sarah explained through the Harmonic Communication Network, is that it was designed by a committee. Different species, different technologies, different approaches to containment all layered together. "Multiple redundant systems," VX9 observed. "Each backup, designed by different civilizations over 3 millennia, should be impossible to overcome." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "But redundancy becomes vulnerability when you understand how the systems interact with each other. Medical training teaches you to think about complex biological systems, where multiple organs and processes have to work together perfectly or the whole organism fails." She had spent days mapping the prison's various containment systems: energy barriers powered by psychic suffering, dimensional locks that prevented access to normal space, quantum restraints that made teleportation impossible, matter conversion fields that neutralized attempts at shape-changing. Each system was individually unbeatable, but they all drew power from the same source: the prisoners themselves. "Every moment of fear, rage, or despair feeds the containment grid," Sarah continued. "The prison literally runs on our negative emotions." "But what happens if we stop providing those emotions?" "Theoretical power reduction," the chronicler mused, "but insufficient. The ambient psychic emanations from 50,000 prisoners would still maintain basic systems." "True," Sarah agreed, "but what if we could coordinate those emanations instead of just eliminating them? What if instead of random emotional chaos, we created focused, directed psychic energy?" Whisper's voice carried new interest. "Organized suffering could be more powerful than random suffering, but also more dangerous to the organizers." "That's where medical knowledge becomes useful," Sarah explained. "I understand how biological systems regulate themselves under stress. I know how to maintain function even under extreme conditions, and more importantly, I know how to help others do the same." The plan that emerged over the following days was staggeringly complex. It required precise timing, perfect coordination, and the willingness of 47 dangerous individuals to trust someone they had never met in person. Phase 1 involved the Dreamwright using his abilities to map the psychic infrastructure of the entire prison. His consciousness could travel through the emotional energy grid, providing detailed intelligence about weak points and system responses. Phase 2 required VX9 to interface with the prison's technological systems. His machine consciousness could navigate the computer networks that managed day-to-day operations, identifying critical control nodes and security protocols. Phase 3 was where things became truly dangerous. The architect would use his ability to design conceptual weapons to create a mental construct that could reshape reality on a limited scale. But the construct would need to be powered by the coordinated will of all 47 prisoners working in perfect harmony. "The risk is considerable," the architect admitted during one planning session. "If the harmony breaks down during the construction phase, the mental feedback could destroy our consciousnesses permanently. And if the consortium realizes what we're attempting," added the chronicler, "they will activate the termination protocols. Permanent death for all participants." Sarah had learned about the termination protocols during her weeks of eavesdropping on prison communications. The consortium maintained the ability to instantly vaporize any prisoner who posed a threat to the prison's integrity. It was the ultimate fail-safe reserved for situations where containment was no longer possible. "So we do it fast, and we do it quietly," Sarah replied. "How long would the reality construct take to create?" 17 minutes, assuming perfect coordination, the architect calculated. "But 17 minutes is far too long to maintain psychic harmony among this group. Our personalities are fundamentally incompatible." This was the core problem that had made Sarah's plans seem impossible. The prisoners in Block Omega were apex predators because they didn't cooperate with others. Their psychology was fundamentally individualistic, aggressive, and territorial. Getting them to work together for 17 minutes should have been impossible. But Sarah had discovered something during her medical analysis of her fellow prisoners. Beneath their monstrous reputations, they were all individuals who had been isolated, misunderstood, and ultimately abandoned by the societies that created them. "You're all lonely," she said during one communication session, ignoring the outraged responses her statement provoked. "You've spent centuries or millennia being the thing that everyone else feared. You've never had the experience of being part of something larger than yourself. Healer Killer presumes to psychoanalyze the apex predators?" Crickstar clicked dangerously. "I'm not analyzing you," Sarah replied. "I'm offering you something you've never had before. The chance to be part of a team. The chance to have your unique abilities valued and respected instead of feared." The response was immediate and hostile. Dozens of voices spoke at once, threatening, dismissing, and ridiculing the idea that the galaxy's most dangerous individuals needed anything from anyone. But Sarah waited patiently for the noise to die down, then spoke again. "Whisper. When was the last time someone asked for your help instead of trying to banish you?" Silence. "VX9. When was the last time someone saw your technological abilities as something beneficial rather than threatening?" More silence. "Architect. When was the last time someone wanted you to build something instead of destroying what you had already built?" The communication channel remained quiet for several minutes. Then Whisper spoke, her voice carrying a note Sarah had never heard before. "You would trust us to help you escape?"
You would rely on our abilities.
"More than that," Sarah replied. "I need your abilities. This plan only works if every one of you contributes your unique skills. You're not just fellow prisoners to me. You're colleagues." The word hung in the dimensional space between their cells. Colleagues. Partners. Team members. "The Healer Killer offers us something unprecedented," the chronicler observed. "Recognition as individuals rather than threats." Over the following days, the dynamic among the Block Omega prisoners shifted in subtle but profound ways. They began to coordinate their activities, sharing information and resources in ways that the prison's designers had never anticipated. The Dreamwrite mapped not just the psychic infrastructure but also the emotional states of prisoners throughout the complex. VX9 created communication networks that connected their planning group with sympathetic individuals in the general population. The architect began designing not just the reality construct, but also backup plans and contingency protocols. Sarah found herself becoming something she had never expected, the leader of the galaxy's most dangerous individuals. But leadership among apex predators required a different approach than leadership among normal people. These individuals respected strength, intelligence, and competence above all else. They had to believe that following Sarah's plan was their best chance of achieving their own goals. "The Healer Killer's strategy has merit," VX9 announced during one planning session. "Probability matrices suggest a 43% chance of successful escape. Those odds would be unacceptable for most enterprises," observed the chronicler, "but they represent a higher success probability than any previous escape attempt in the prison's history." Sarah knew that 43% wasn't nearly good enough. She needed to find ways to improve their chances, which meant understanding exactly what could go wrong and developing countermeasures for each possibility. The most likely failure point was detection by the prison's security systems. If the consortium realized what they were planning too early in the process, the termination protocols would activate before they could complete the reality construct. The solution came from an unexpected source: the World Eater. "This one consumed 3 solar systems," the massive creature rumbled during a communication session. "But consumption teaches you about destruction patterns. Security systems focus on active threats. They ignore gradual changes that appear to be natural deterioration." "You're suggesting we disguise our preparation as normal prison decay?" Sarah asked. "Precisely. Void Nexus is old. Systems fail regularly. Security algorithms expect equipment malfunctions, power fluctuations, and minor dimensional instabilities. If our activities mimic these expected failures, the detection systems will categorize them as routine maintenance issues." This insight led to a completely revised approach. Instead of trying to hide their activities, they would disguise them as natural system degradation. VX9 would simulate equipment failures that coincidentally provided them with access to critical systems. The Dreamwrite would create psychic disturbances that looked like normal prisoner unrest, but actually mapped the emotional infrastructure. The architect would design his reality construct to appear like a structural weakness in the dimensional barriers. "Elegant solution," the chronicler approved. "We hide our preparation by making it appear to be the prison's own gradual collapse." But Sarah knew that even the best plan meant nothing if the people executing it didn't trust each other completely. She began organizing what she privately thought of as team-building exercises, though she was careful not to use that term with her fellow prisoners. She asked each individual to teach the others about their unique abilities. Krickstar explained the hunting strategies that had made him so effective. Whisper described the philosophy of death that had guided her actions. VX9 shared the mathematical principles that governed his technological integration. Knowledge sharing increases our collective capabilities, Sarah explained. But more importantly, it helps us understand how to support each other during the escape attempt. What she didn't say was that she was building something that had never existed before, a functional social group composed entirely of apex predators. She was teaching them to see each other not as competitors but as resources. The transformation was subtle but remarkable. Prisoners who had spent centuries in isolation began to develop something resembling friendships. They started coordinating their daily activities, sharing food, and even engaging in what could only be described as casual conversation. "The healer-killer has accomplished something unprecedented," the chronicler observed during one evening's communication session. "She has created a pack of apex predators." "And what," asked Whisper, "does the leader of such a pack plan to do once we escape?" Sarah had been dreading that question. The truth was, she hadn't thought much beyond getting out of the prison. These individuals were here for good reasons. They had committed acts of destruction that had traumatized entire civilizations. But over the weeks of working with them, she had begun to understand something that the consortium apparently hadn't. These prisoners weren't irredeemably evil. They were individuals who had been created or shaped by circumstances beyond their control, then punished for becoming what their situations had demanded. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that 47 individuals with your capabilities could do incredible things if they were working toward construction instead of destruction." "The healer-killer envisions reforming the apex predators?" Krickstar clicked, but his tone was curious rather than hostile. "I envision giving you the chance to choose who you want to be," Sarah replied. "The consortium locked you away because they couldn't imagine any use for your abilities except destruction. But I've been working with you for weeks, and I've seen what you can accomplish when you're building something instead of tearing it down." The communication channel fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Contemplative rather than hostile. "First," said the architect finally, "we must escape. Then we can discover what kinds of builders the galaxy's destroyers might become." Sarah smiled in her crystalline cell. The plan was as ready as it could be. The team was as unified as 47 apex predators could manage. Tomorrow, they would attempt the impossible. And if they succeeded, the galaxy would learn what happened when humanity's greatest strength, the ability to see potential in the most unlikely places, met the universe's most dangerous individuals. The escape began at exactly 0347 Standard Time, when VX9 initiated what appeared to be a routine power fluctuation in Section C7. To the prison's automated systems, it looked like another aging component failing in the 3,000-year-old structure. To the 47 conspirators, it was the signal that Phase 1 had commenced. Sarah felt her heart racing as she pressed her hands against the crystalline wall of her cell. Through the harmonic network, she could hear the controlled breathing of her fellow prisoners as they began the most dangerous meditation in galactic history. "Psychic resonance establishing," whispered the Dreamwright. "All participants maintaining baseline emotional control." This was the critical moment. For the plan to work, 47 individuals who had spent their lives as solitary apex predators needed to synchronize their consciousness into a single, directed force. Sarah had been training them for this moment for weeks, using medical knowledge about how biological systems achieved homeostasis under stress. "Remember your breathing patterns," Sarah spoke into the network. "Feel the rhythm of your heartbeat. Let that become the rhythm that connects us all." One by one, she felt the other prisoners joining the meditation. Krickstar's chittering mandibles fell silent as he achieved the focus state she had taught him. Whisper's chaotic energy patterns smoothed into the harmonious waves they had practiced. Even the World Eater's massive consciousness compressed itself into the delicate frequency required for the group meditation. Phase 2 initiating, VX9 reported, his mechanical voice carrying across both electronic and psychic communication channels, accessing primary control systems through degraded power conduits. Sarah could feel the moment when their collective psychic energy reached critical mass. 47 minds, each one capable of devastating destruction, all focused on a single goal with perfect unity. The power that flowed through their connection was unlike anything she had ever experienced, but power without control was just chaos. This was where her medical training became crucial. "VX9, your pulse is spiking. she said calmly. Remember the regulation techniques. Smooth, steady, controlled. Whisper, I'm detecting emotional cascade beginning. Redirect that energy into the construct foundation. Architect, the pattern is holding, but I need you to reinforce the stability matrix. Draw power from the group harmony. Don't fight against it. For 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours, Sarah served as both conductor and doctor for the most dangerous orchestra in the galaxy. She monitored each prisoner's psychological state, providing guidance when their focus wavered, redirecting energy when systems became unstable, and maintaining the delicate balance that kept their collective effort from tearing apart their minds. The reality construct took shape slowly, a conceptual weapon designed by the architect and powered by the unified will of 47 apex predators. It wasn't visible in any normal sense, but Sarah could feel it growing in the dimensional space around them. A tool for reshaping the fundamental nature of their prison, turning their containment systems into doorways. Construct completion at 97%, the architect reported, his voice strained by the effort of coordinating such massive forces. Final stabilization requires. Alarms began sounding throughout the prison. Security breach detected in Block Omega, announced the automated systems. Initiating containment protocols. They know, Crickstar clicked, his mental discipline wavering as battle instincts kicked in. Hold the pattern, Sarah commanded. We're too close to stop now. VX9, can you mask our signatures? Attempting electronic countermeasures, the machine consciousness replied. Success probability dropping rapidly. Through the psychic network, Sarah could feel her teammates beginning to panic. 47 apex predators who had never learned to trust anyone were starting to revert to their natural survival instincts, which meant abandoning cooperation in favor of individual action. Listen to me, Sarah said, projecting calm authority through the harmonic network, even as her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. We've gotten further than anyone has ever gotten before. We are 17 seconds away from completion. 17 seconds away from freedom. Termination protocols authorized, announced a new voice over the prison's communication system. All prisoners in Block Omega prepare for immediate execution. Sarah felt the construct wavering as several prisoners' focus broke entirely. The delicate harmony they had built was coming apart, and, without perfect unity, the reality weapon would collapse and take their consciousness with it. This was the moment when everything she had learned about leadership, medicine, and human psychology came together. Chronicler, she said, her voice cutting through the growing psychic chaos, tell them who we are. The ancient being's voice rolled through the network, carrying the weight of eons and the authority of absolute truth. We are not prisoners. We are not monsters. We are the 47 beings who chose to trust each other when trust was impossible. We are the pack that the healer-killer built from apex predators. We are something the galaxy has never seen before, and we will not be destroyed by those who lack the imagination to understand what we have become. The wavering stopped, the construct solidified. And then the architect spoke the words that rewrote reality. Construction complete. Initiating dimensional breach. The crystalline walls of Sarah's cell simply ceased to exist. Not shattered, not melted, not teleported away. They stopped being part of the universe, as if they had been deleted from the cosmic equation by someone with administrative access to reality itself. Around her she could see the other prisoners emerging from cells that were similarly opening like flowers blooming in reverse. Crickstar unfolded his massive arthropod frame from a containment unit that had held him for 2 centuries. Whisper materialized from what had been an energy barrier, her form shifting between states of matter as she moved. VX9 flowed out of his technological restraints like liquid metal reassembling itself into a more comfortable configuration. Phase 3, Sarah announced, as 47 of the galaxy's most feared individuals stood in the corridor of Block Omega, free for the first time in decades or centuries. Now we deal with the guards. But when the security forces arrived, they found something they weren't prepared to handle. Instead of 47 chaotic, raging prisoners fighting among themselves, they encountered a coordinated unit moving with military precision. The World Eater created a barrier of controlled gravitational distortion that deflected energy weapons. Whisper phased through solid barriers to disable security systems from the inside. VX9 turned the prison's own defensive systems against its guards. The Dreamwright filled the corridors with illusions that made accurate targeting impossible. And Sarah coordinated it all, her medical scanner providing real-time analysis of the guards' stress levels, equipment status, and tactical responses. Remember, she called to her team as they fought their way through the prison's defensive systems, we're not here to destroy this place. We're here to leave it, Minimum necessary force, maximum efficiency. This was perhaps the most remarkable thing about their escape. 47 apex predators, beings whose names were synonymous with destruction across the galaxy, were fighting their way to freedom while actively trying not to cause unnecessary harm. They reached the transport bay in less than an hour, their coordinated assault overwhelming security forces that had been designed to handle chaotic individual breakouts rather than organized group operations. The transport ships were exactly where Sarah had predicted, fueled and ready for emergency evacuations. "Which ship?" asked the architect, as alarms continued to sound throughout the dimensional pocket. Sarah's scanner identified the largest, most heavily shielded vessel in the bay. "The consortium command ship. If we're going to make a statement, we might as well make it in their own flagship." As they boarded the vessel, VX-9 interfaced with its systems and discovered something that made them all pause. "Automated distress beacon," he reported. "This ship has been broadcasting emergency signals to Consortium High Command for the past 3 hours. They know we're escaping, and they know exactly when we'll emerge from the dimensional pocket." "A trap," Crickstar observed. "An opportunity," Sarah corrected. "They're expecting 47 chaotic monsters to come stumbling out of Void Nexus. Instead, they're going to meet a coordinated team with a plan. The plan that emerged during their 3-hour journey back to normal space was audacious even by the standards of individuals who had reshaped worlds. Instead of trying to hide or run from the consortium forces waiting for them, they would surrender." "Surrender?" Whisper asked, her voice carrying disbelief. "Strategic surrender," Sarah clarified. "We return to normal space, broadcast a message to the entire galaxy explaining what really happened here, and then we turn ourselves over to consortium authorities with one condition. We demand a proper trial." "Trials require evidence," the chronicler observed. "Evidence of what?" Sarah smiled. "Evidence that we're not the monsters they claimed we were. Evidence that we can work together constructively. Evidence that the consortium has been using the threat of people like us to maintain political control." The message they broadcast as they emerged from the dimensional pocket was simultaneously transmitted to every major news network, planetary government, and communications hub in the galaxy. 47 voices speaking in turn, each one telling their story, explaining their crimes and context, and describing their experience working together under Sarah's leadership. But it was Sarah's portion of the message that changed everything. "My name is Doctor Sarah Chen of the Terran Medical Corps. 3 months ago, I was accidentally classified as a dangerous criminal and imprisoned with 46 beings that the galaxy considers monsters. What I learned during my imprisonment is that the universe's most dangerous individuals are not those who destroy things. The most dangerous individual is someone who can take broken things and fix them in ways that threaten the people who benefited from their being broken. The consortium imprisoned these individuals not because they were evil, but because they represented inconvenient truths about our galactic civilization. Each one of them became what they are because our society failed them, abandoned them, or actively shaped them into weapons. But I've seen what these individuals can accomplish when they choose to work together toward construction rather than destruction. I've seen apex predators become protectors. I've seen weapons of mass destruction become tools for building something better. We are surrendering ourselves not because we accept the charges against us, but because we demand the right to prove that the galaxy's most dangerous individuals can also be its most valuable citizens. The consortium fleet that surrounded them as they emerged from the dimensional pocket, the escapees weren't fighting, they weren't trying to run, they were asking for due process, and the entire galaxy was watching. The trials that followed lasted for 2 years and became the most watched legal proceedings in galactic history. One by one, the 47 prisoners had their cases reviewed in the context of their origins, their circumstances, and their demonstrated ability to work constructively together. Some were indeed returned to imprisonment, their crimes too severe and their psychological profiles too unstable for safe integration into society. But others, many others, were given opportunities to use their unique abilities in service to the galaxy that had once feared them. The architect designed refugee housing that could be constructed in hours. VX-9 developed communication systems that allowed real-time translation between species that had never been able to speak to each other before. Whisper became a counselor for terminally ill patients, helping them understand death as a natural transition rather than something to be feared. And Crickstar, the arthropod hunter who had systematically tracked prey across an entire star system, became the galaxy's most effective search and rescue specialist, using his predatory skills to locate missing persons and disaster survivors. Sarah herself was cleared of all charges and offered a position as Director of Rehabilitation for Dangerous Individuals, a new department created specifically to address the underlying issues that had created the Void Nexus crisis. But perhaps the most remarkable outcome was what happened to the 47 individuals who had escaped together. They remained in contact with each other, forming the galaxy's first functional support network for beings with dangerous capabilities. They met regularly, shared experiences, and helped each other navigate the complex process of integrating into a society that still regarded them with suspicion. They had become, in every sense that mattered, a family. 6 months after their escape, Sarah received a message through the harmonic communication network they still used to stay in touch. It was from the Chronicler, and it contained a single observation. The Healer Killer has taught the galaxy's apex predators the most dangerous skill of all, cooperation. The universe will never be the same. Sarah smiled as she read the message. She was back to her work with the Terran Medical Corps, but now her patient list included beings whose medical needs had never been addressed before, creatures whose bodies spanned multiple dimensions, consciousness that existed in quantum superposition, beings whose emotional states affected local reality. She was still fixing broken things. But now the broken things included individuals, relationships, and systems of justice that had been failing for millennia. The galaxy's most dangerous individual, as it turned out, really was someone who could take broken things and fix them in ways that threatened those who benefited from their being broken. And Sarah Chen was very, very good at her job.